Test, test, test. What's up, Blake? I see you in here. Hopefully, get a few more people tuning in here shortly. Blake, I know you said you probably wouldn't be able to get on the mic today. Let me know if that changed. If not, no worries at all. But I just see you in here, so I figured I'd ask. All right, let's see here. What's up, Fletch? Welcome in. I'm going to change this really quick. View the entire screen. Share. All right, guys, we're going to get started here shortly. Just waiting for a few more people to filter in. It's a little slow moving Sunday, I guess. All right. All right, well, we'll get started here. First thing I kind of wanted to talk about was the quarterback situation. I know that we have two cheap quarterbacks on the slate that have it's kind of been some late news here, specifically Aiden O'Connell and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR and AOC for short. It's funny that they both have the acronym or initials that we can easily identify them as. I do think both of them have low floors, so I want to get that out of the way first and foremost, and low ceilings too, I should mention. I think, DTR kind of coming in late is going to mitigate some of this O'Connell ownership that was, coming in pretty strong here. I think in a nutshell or in a vacuum, DTR is better than Aiden O'Connell from a fantasy perspective because DTR just has so much more rushing equity. It feels, I was just saying in chat, I was talking with Ethan, I believe, saying that I think DTR, you can feel really good about him getting like 7 or 8 rushes and potential for, 10 to 12 even. So I think that's really intriguing for a $4,600 quarterback. Both of those guys are interesting. I think they feel more like cash plays to me. DTR maybe a little bit in tournaments, but man, it's just like, I don't know if the ceiling is there. And specifically in this Cleveland-Baltimore game, that game from a fantasy perspective does not have a lot of juice to it. Both teams play slow, the totals are low, and it's dropping due to the Watson news. So from a whole game, if we zoom out, the whole game to me is very unappealing. So I think there's tremendous downside to both of them. However, they do allow you to get a lot. Aiden O'Connell at 4,000 and DTR at 4,600. If you play them, you can really fit 3 of these studs up at the top. You probably have to punt another spot or 2, but people were posting lineups this morning with Aiden O'Connell that had CMC, Devontae. Where is Justin Jefferson? Why don't I see him here? That is strange. Okay, I have no... Oh, it must be something with the filter. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, I was seeing people post lineups with O'Connell, Keenan Allen, CMC, and even like one more of the top end receivers. So it really opens up a lot. But it really feels like you're really limiting your ceiling at the quarterback position, which, if you go up like another $1,000, another $2,000, you can find $2,000 from O'Connell. You can really find guys that have 25, 30 point upside. Now the top end guys are really expensive, very, very expensive, specifically Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, and even Herbert, who's in a great spot, I will admit. But when Herbert's this close to these guys that have so much more rushing equity than him, It's kind of tough for me to play Herbert in that spot, even though Keenan Allen is obviously one of the chalkiest players on the slate. As far as quarterbacks go, I think my favorites, considering price, ownership, all that, it's hard not to like Anthony Richardson, even at his increased ownership. I think in smaller field stuff, he could get up to like 15%, which isn't crazy. I think I'm comfortable with that. And then in large field stuff, I think you probably find him around this 10, 11, 12% range. So I think Richardson's really interesting. That game should be high paced. Both teams have been playing fast and in the short sample that we're dealing with so far. So I like Anthony Richardson quite a bit. I like Tua. Tua at 7,400. Very low ownership. I think this is even a little bit high. Let me see if I can.
Let's go.
Yo, who is that? Is that Audi?
Yeah, dude, my bad. When you were calling me out to like help you out and go over some of the plays I liked the last time you did the stream, my internet kind of shut the bed, so my apologies.
No need to apologize. I'm happy when people are willing to jump in here with me. So if it works out, great. If not, no worries at all. I figured that was you, Audi, since I was talking about Tua. But yeah, why don't you, if you're ready to go, let us know. I'm sure you're on Tua today, but do you have, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the running back situation there between Mostert and A-Chain. I really like both of them. And neither, I think their pricing is kind of keeping ownership down here, but I don't think either one is going to, even get close to flirting with double digits. We could see both around 5% here. Audi, do you have a strong preference between Mostert or A-Chain? Are you playing them or not really?
I like Mostert for sure. Achan, I had to check the injury report. I'm sure Salvin Ahmed probably won't be in, but if he's in, he's gonna mix in for touches too. I don't like Achan's at what, like 5,700. I don't know what the ownership is. I'd have to take a look, but Mostert's definitely the play. I'd have to look at the ownership though.
Yeah,
I'm trying
A-Chain.
to so small on your screen, so I'm trying to like.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, A-Chain is 5,700 and Mostert is 6,500. I agree with Audi there. I think Mostert is probably the safer of the two. But truthfully, I think they're both priced like pretty appropriately. And because of the projections, they're just not going to get a lot of ownership. There was a report too. I forget who it was, so I can't credit them. But there was a report saying that that A-Chain is going to get more carry or more touches. Excuse me. And Audi mentioned Ahmed too. I agree with him. I think if he's out, I would feel even better about the situation. Because obviously he's going to mix in if he's active. But even if he is active, I still like taking shots on both of these guys. I think that, well, for one thing, that game environment is really nice. It's the highest total on the slate at 53.5. So, getting 5% owned players that you can feel good about getting, 10 plus touches in a game environment like that, I think is really appealing. Obviously the upside is there. We saw it last week. So yeah, I like both of those guys. And I like Tyreek and Waddle too. Tyreek at 10 to 15% feels really, really nice. Obviously the 9,200 price tag is tough to get to. Waddle also a little bit more pricey than I would like him, but that's why you see this ownership so low. He's going to come in so low owned.
Yeah, like 2% at least what I have. And
Yep.
then I see A-Chain at 2% too, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
54 total over under.
Yeah, it is crazy, and yeah, it usually doesn't work like that. Like the games with the high totals, generally the ownership comes with it. I think these guys are priced up a little bit, so the ownership makes sense to me. But I do think it's a place to attack too. So I think the Dolphins is one of my favorite spots to attack today. And you don't even necessarily need Tua. Like you can play Waddle, Tyreek, A-Chain, or Mostert, without Tua. Obviously, the running backs you can play without them. But I'm fine running Waddle or Tyreek even without Tua. But Tua at his ownership and game environment, I think, is really, really interesting. So, yeah, I like him. How about on the Bills side, Audi? Do you have? I'm assuming you're running some Dolphin stack. Are you going to bring it back with a Bills player or two?
I'm looking at this now, and it's like all the ownership's coming on the Bills side. It's like this is going to be a close game. It's projected to be high scoring. So like, why is all the ownership on one side? It's weird. So it's like you wanna go on the other side. Everybody's going to go Josh Allen and Diggs. So maybe okay, I want to go Tua with like, and if I wanted to switch it up and get crazy in a GPP, maybe go with Waddle. But like also no one's going on the running backs, which is weird because like if you're going to go with Josh Allen and Diggs, like obviously you'd run it back with Mostert. Like that, you would think that would be chalk, but Mostert's not even high owned either. And the way to attack the Bills is like to run the ball. So I find it weird. I might do like a stack with like Tua, Waddle, and Mostert, and then come back with something different. Like I think Kincaid's due for a breakout. Dolphins give up a lot in the middle of the field. They're trying to limit the big plays to Davis and Diggs. So
Yeah, I like that call. I was just gonna mention the tight ends too because I think tight end generally is very weak this week. Or I shouldn't say weak this week. That sounds weird. Is not great this week. So I think punting off at the position and taking some chances on these guys in this really positive game environment is a good way to go. And I'm fine with Kincaid or Knox, to be honest. I don't have a strong preference between the two. It looks like ownership is kind of evened out between them. I was seeing Kincaid a little bit higher earlier in the week. And your guess is as good as mine to, which one is going to do better, but I think both of them are in a good spot. So, sounds like Audi likes this game too. I agree with him too that, majority of the ownership is coming in on the Bills side, but relative to the slate too, the Bills players aren't that highly owned. Like Diggs, if we pull up all the wide receivers here, Diggs and Tyreek both coming in, 10 to 15%. I think it's really because Keenan Allen is going to take, the vast majority of the ownership at the top for top end wide receivers, at least. It is interesting too. Keenan Allen is in the afternoon slate or, the later games. So, that creates an interesting late swap opportunity because if you're not, let's say the early games don't go well for you, you're probably not going to want to play Keenan Allen. And a really easy pivot, in my opinion, is Tony Pollard, who also plays in the afternoon games. I think you could say the same thing for CMC, and I don't know why he's not showing up either. It must be something, it's these dumb filters. Apologies. But yeah, CMC, kind of the same thing. Excuse me. If you are not doing well in the morning games and then he comes out, or you have McCaffrey, I would be getting off McCaffrey and Allen if the early games don't go well for you. So there's a plenty of pivots too. McCaffrey, you probably need someone else because his salary is so high relative to the other later game players. So you probably, if you're playing McCaffrey, I would almost force in another afternoon player, just so you have some room to swap around with, because if we just like highlight these afternoon games, you can see McCaffrey is so far ahead of everyone else in price that you're going to want to add someone else in there from the afternoon game so you have some late swap opportunity. I should mention, too, that I'm strictly talking tournaments. I don't play cash games personally. I know there's some cash game discussion going on in the NFL Fantasy channel. So if you guys are playing cash and you'd like to know, a little bit more about that, just jump in the chat and ask some questions. But I don't personally play cash, so everything that we're discussing here is strictly tournaments. Let's jump to another stack that I like, and it is where'd he go? Brock Purdy. I like Brock Purdy, man. I mean, I think that he is. You can honestly play him with Christian McCaffrey, but I also think that he's really good leverage off Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey, he's basically got like a touchdown baked into his projection. So if he doesn't score that touchdown and he only puts up, 18, 19 points, then he's not going to pay off that 9,200 price tag. He almost needs a touchdown and maybe even like, almost 2 touchdowns to really like separate himself from the field. So I think Purdy is really good leverage off of McCaffrey. And then who is it? Ayuk. 5%, man. I mean, we saw the ceiling in week 1. 8 catches, 129 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Debo is coming in banged up. I know Ayuk has this questionable tag, but he was ruled in earlier in the week, and the practice reports look good on him too. Debo less so, but I also like Debo for tournaments. But man, Purdy to Ayuk looks really good, and I don't think people are going to play George Kittle either. He's a guy that always has upside. He has a very low floor too, but we saw it last week, 9 targets, 90 yards. If he gets in the end zone, that's a huge game. So I think both Ayuk and George Kittle paired with Purdy is really good leverage off of CMC. It would not be shocking to see the Niners put up 35, even like 40 points today on the Cardinals, and those got to come somewhere. So I think that the CMC is in a great spot, but for tournament stuff, I think that Brock Purdy is really interesting, and I'm making about 10 lineups today. I'm switching from MME like I played the first 3 weeks. I'm just going to do a lot of single entry stuff and make about 10 lineups. So I think Brock Purdy is really interesting. Audi, if I could get you back in here, let me know. Let me do a roll call really quick. Ethan, are you here and do you have your mic on? If you don't, no problem at all. I just figured I'd ask since I see you in here. All right, no worries. Feel free if you have any opinions and want to get them in, let us know, Ethan. But Audi, besides those quarterbacks that we just listed, let's throw out Tua, Josh Allen, and Purdy, like I just mentioned. Is there anyone else that you have a strong liking for?
Well, you had gone over Anthony Richardson like when you first started the call. I think I was a couple minutes late, but I was looking at him like earlier this week, and I saw he was going to clear concussion protocol. So, I mean, you look at his stats when he didn't even finish last game. It's like just the rushing alone is enough to warrant his price, and then you have throwing on top of it. I like it. I mean, I have him at 8% though, so it's like, it's kind of in the middle of like where, okay, maybe I should look for something that's lower owned depending on what kind of like field GPP I'm looking at, but I don't know what kind of ownership you have him for.
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher. Coming in, let me see, ownership, about 11%, which is the highest of the quarterbacks, I should mention. But truthfully, I don't generally worry about quarterback ownership too much, especially with these high ceiling guys like Tua and Josh Allen and stuff. The where I don't like the ownership is guys that have low floors like Aiden O'Connell. His ownership makes me nervous because it's one of those things that his floor is really low and he's coming with ownership. So it's like, even if he does like decently well, it's like, are you really getting paid off that much? Whereas Anthony Richardson legitimately has like 40-point upside. We saw it 2 weeks ago. He had, I want to say 19 DraftKings points in literally less than a quarter, and then exited the game. So Anthony Richardson is like, I mean, we could see him at the end of this year being priced up with like the Hurtses and the Allens. And so I think that getting him at 6,700, and I'm going to say only, 11% ownership, and Audi even has 8. So, give or take a few percentage points on either side, but I'm going to put, only 11% ownership in air quotes, because I think, we could look back and see this 6,700 and just think that he should have been 20, even 25% owned with how much upside and how much rushing equity he has. So yeah, I'm with Audi there. I think that Richardson, even at the higher ownership for a QB, is in a great spot. Great spot.
I'm looking at that Thompson Robinson too. That ownership probably isn't updated yet, right? Because he's got a little rushing upside too, and he's on a good team. So like, if he's coming in pretty low, I mean, obviously it's gonna have to update, but like, I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on him, especially if you're doing like a low cost, like if you're multi-entrying.
For sure. Yeah, no, and I think, these ownership projections are, Audi's right. They're probably not fully updated, and it's going to be a little bit wonky in my opinion because it's happening so late. So it's hard to sort of get a read on what's going to happen. I mean, ownership nowadays, how most places project it, is they have access to like a lot of the different sites that do ownership projections. They see what they have them projected for. They run like, they'll run like a 150 set or a 300 set of lineups, see how often they're coming up in those lineups. And then that's how they kind of, congregate or aggregate, excuse me, is the correct term I'm looking for, aggregate those projections. So right now, maybe not everyone has DTR in their projections or like updating projections and stuff. So it's a good point by Audi that these these ownership projections are likely a little bit wonky and probably to be taken with a grain of salt. DTR in a vacuum is great. If this was a better game environment, I would be all over it. The game environment is like sort of the only downside in my opinion, because DTR has great rushing equity and you don't have to pair him with anyone because of that rushing equity. So it's not like you have to force in a Cooper or Elijah Moore or Njoku, who is going to play, by the way. I know Njoku had a really late questionable tag, but looking like he's going to play. So I think those are pretty much my favorite quarterbacks. I know a lot of people are on the Fields Wilson combo. And I like those guys like in a vacuum. It just feels like neither one has been great. And so when they're coming with some ownership, it makes me pause a little bit. That game is also, neither team is playing fast. So it's kind of supposed to be a slow paced game. I'm not exactly sure that either team can push the other one. But we'll see. Like, both defenses are terrible, so it's possible this turns into a little bit of a shootout. But it's hard for me to see like either team flirting with like 30 points. Maybe Denver can get there, but it's tough for me to see Chicago really putting it all together. But we'll see. I don't have a strong opinion on that one. My lean is just that it's gonna be popular, and with how bad those QBs have been, my lean is to stay away. But I'm sure I'll have at least one of them across my 10 lineups. So, a couple interesting spots here at the quarterback position. I would say my favorites, just to recap, Tua, Richardson, and Purdy, I think are my like top three that are kind of a tier above the rest. And then obviously like DTR and AOC, you can formulate your own opinions about them. My opinion is I think they're a little bit too low of a floor. I just don't know. Now that I'm saying it, I don't know. But yeah, with me just making 10 lineups, I think I'm going to probably head up, towards these top end guys. All right, let's move.
Crazy.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to say Josh Kelly's looking kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, then
everybody's going away from him, and he plays over 70% of the snaps. He's got a great matchup against a rookie quarterback, so it's like, I don't know. I feel like I kind of want to go to him for 5,300.
No, it's a perfect segue too, because I was going to say let's move on to running backs. And Kelly, has burned a lot of people in these last couple weeks, and I think that this is his best spot of the 3 weeks, to be honest. So, and his least amount of ownership too. So I think people are getting really fed up with Kelly, or at least have been fed up with him the last 2 weeks. The positives for him. And I think it gets even better with Aiden O'Connell, because obviously Aiden O'Connell is a downgrade from Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's even more likely that that the Chargers play with a lead here, which bodes well for Kelly. And it's not difficult to run on this Raiders defense. So I think that's a great call by Audi, taking Kelly kind of as, a post-hype player, a guy that had a ton of ownership the last 2 weeks and failed miserably, jumping on him now at 5,300. Man, if he gets, he could flirt with 15, 20 carries, and if he gets in the end zone, it feels like he's really going to pay off his price tag. And like Audi mentioned, the 5,300 price tag is really nice. So, I'll have some Kelly for sure across my 10 lineups. I like him quite a bit. Obviously, we touched on McCaffrey a little bit. I don't need to tell you how good McCaffrey is. McCaffrey's awesome. This 9,200 price tag, honestly, you could probably make the case that he's a little bit underpriced, which I know sounds crazy, but 9,200 with no Elijah Mitchell. They really don't have anyone behind Mitchell or McCaffrey that they trust. So even in a blowout, what game was? Oh, the Giants game where they were blowing out the Giants. And even the Steelers game in week 1 where they were blowing them out, McCaffrey's getting fourth quarter touches. Like, they're not bringing in other people to spell McCaffrey. It's kind of crazy to me, to be honest. But I know the concern with him is blowout, I guess. But the Niners, it's a small sample, but in the small sample that we're dealing with, he's been in the game in fourth quarters, even in blowouts. So I think McCaffrey is in a great spot. I also really like these other top guys in Pollard and Jacobs. Pollard, I think, is a good pivot off McCaffrey. I know you can see their ownerships are kind of similar here. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think McCaffrey is going to be, a good chunk ahead of Pollard. So I think Pollard is a good late pivot for McCaffrey, and also just a great play in his own right too. Has very high upside, has multiple touchdown upside. His role has been fantastic in the first 3 weeks, so I think he's really interesting. And then Jacobs is sort of a buy low candidate. Has really not done well these first 3 weeks, but his usage has been great. 19 carries, 9 carries in that Bills game where, the Raiders just couldn't get anything going. And then 17 carries last week against the Steelers, and then 5, 6, and 3 targets through the first 3 games. So, Jacobs always has 20 plus touch upside potential. And in this matchup where they don't have Jimmy Garoppolo, you could really see them try to lean on the run game, and you can absolutely run on the Chargers. So I think Jacobs is in a great spot. We touched on Mostert and A-Chain with Audi. I think both of them are great, man. Just the ownership has me really, really intrigued. I'm gonna make it a point to get both of them in a lineup, not together, but separately. I think that they're both great. We should touch on James Cook too, because he's in that same game environment and not coming with a lot of ownership, has a good projection. I like James Cook too. I really like pretty much everyone in that game. It doesn't seem like anyone is too overowned. Even with Tyreek and Diggs around 15%, man, that's very appealing for both of them. So I like that game a lot. We'll touch on the chalk guys. I think these are the popular cash plays right here, and Kyren Williams and Zach Moss, or two of the potential cash plays. I think if you're playing cash, you need Kyren Williams. I think his ownership and his projection makes it so that he's a priority in cash games. Now in tournaments, I think you can get off him. I think he has a really, really nice floor, but we saw last week that the ceiling can drop out. Even last week he had 10 attempts. They're trailing for the majority of the game. He had 10 rushing attempts. He did have 7 targets, but only converted 2 of those and put up 8.5 DraftKings points. So, his floor is safe. I feel like that's probably his floor is, 8.5 to 9. And things did go pretty poorly for him, especially for a running back to get 7 targets and only convert 2 of them. Those are typically, high percentage throws, because running backs obviously run their routes closer to the line of scrimmage, so you'd expect him to convert more of these targets. But yeah, he's a very safe play. I'll put safe in quotation marks because I kind of hate that phrasing, But I do think that I should say his role is really safe. He's literally played 100% of the snaps. I think he played 100% of the snaps last week. So. That's like unheard of, even for McCaffrey. So Kyren Williams in a great spot. Zach Moss in a great spot too. I would not play him and Richardson together. I think that there's too much. They just take away from each other's rushing touchdown equity. So I would not play them together, even though Richardson has been pretty good about targeting the running backs so far. I would not play Richardson and Moss together, but individually, I think they're both great. Madison is an interesting one. Madison has had a great, he's been very bad to start the season from like an efficiency standpoint, but look at his usage last week, 20 attempts and 7 targets. That's Christian McCaffrey level of usage right there. Even more so, like I don't think that might be the most opportunities that a running back's had, or at least, in the top upper echelon of usage as far as one game samples go. Now, Cam Akers is going to be active today, or last I heard he was going to be active. So I don't think that affects Madison as much as people think. I think if anything, it really affects Chandler. I think that Chandler was, not playing great either. So I think that, that pretty much pulls Chandler off the table. And I think Akers is going to affect Madison a little bit. I just think people are over exaggerating how much Akers is going to play, especially in his first game with the team. So I think Madison is actually in a good spot. immediately or moderately owned, excuse me. But this game environment is really nice. Minnesota and Carolina both have a higher pace than average teams, so this game could play faster. You'd expect them to play from ahead. They're 4.5-point favorites. They're 0-3. They really need a win. So I would not be scared to play Madison today, and I'll probably have some exposure to him across my 10 lineups. Sanders, same deal, same game, is coming in with a questionable tag. I think it was a soft tissue injury. I can't remember if it was a groin or a hamstring, but one of those. So I think he's a really interesting spot. I've seen a lot of talk about Swift. Swift makes me a little bit nervous. I'll be totally honest. I know that we saw Kenny Gainwell in that first game really have the majority of the snaps and the touches, and then when he went out in week 2, then Swift really took over and had an insane workload, 28 attempts and 3 targets. A little bit scaled back last week, 16 attempts and two targets as well. But you can see only about half the snaps when Gainwell came back. So I just don't want to overreact to 2 solid games or one really good game and then one solid game in a row, especially now with Gainwell probably being more healthy than he was last week. So I'm a little bit off Swift, to be totally honest. I think his ownership, if he was coming in low owned, I would like it, but he's moderately owned. I mean, he's more. We have Madison and Sanders projected for more and coming with less ownership. So that's kind of an easy pivot when you see that, more projection, less ownership. That's easy, man. I mean, so it's kind of I'm kind of off Swift, to be honest. I might have him in one lineup, but I'm not even sure about that, to be honest. I think he's got more risk than ceiling, and then we kind of discussed it with Richardson, Moss, but Hurts obviously has probably the highest rushing touchdown equity of any quarterback in the league, and that really hurts Swift. So yeah, I'm kind of off Swift. I think there's way more ways that he fails than succeeds, in my opinion. I obviously could be wrong about that, but that's how I'm feeling about it. Javonte Williams is really interesting. He is going to come with some ownership, which makes sense because it's a great matchup. But Broncos have not played ahead almost at all this season. So I think this could be the first game where they're playing with the lead, and we get to see Javonte maybe flirt with 15 carries and hopefully get 3+ targets like he's been getting these first 3 weeks. But you can see 19 opportunities, 15 opportunities, and then 14 opportunities. 14 opportunities on 26 snaps in a game they lost by 50 points. I think that should be looked at as a positive, not as a negative. He played on 26 snaps and got 14 opportunities, and they lost by 50. So if they're playing with a lead in this game against an easier defense in the Chicago Bears, I think Javonte's in a great spot. If he gets in the end zone, I think he could flirt with 20 points, and getting 20 points at 5,500 is great in my opinion. So I like Javonte even at his somewhat increased ownership, coming in around 15%. We touched on Kelly. I think he's in a good spot too. I won't elaborate on that anymore because I think me and Audi covered that pretty heavily. Ford, I thought, was an interesting tournament play with DTR there. Way more rushing equity than Deshaun Watson. I also don't think the offense is going to be nearly as good, and the offense hasn't looked great so far this season. I also think the game environment really sucks too, so I'm off Ford here. If you want a really ugly play for large field stuff, I think Najee Harris. You could do worse than Najee Harris at 5,500. I mean, you could see. Let's go back to his. He's projecting a 1.5 less than Javonte, but you get him at 1/5 of the ownership, less than 1/5 of the ownership. So that to me is a good tournament pivot if you need one. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Audi, I'll get you back in here. I know I just pretty much got on all the running backs there, but is there anyone? Let's remove the Miami guys that we discussed earlier. But do you have a favorite running back of the group here?
Well, I was actually going to bring up the Gainwell point. I'm seeing him at 1%, and I'm seeing Swift at around 14%. Obviously, I don't have the best projections, but that's just a rough estimate. Like if you really think Philly's going to blow them out and they're going to run the ball, like how do you not at least consider Gainwell as a pivot for like that low percentage, especially considering what you were stating about like how much he played week 1 and how it's a split backfield. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, but sometimes that's good in large field GPP because everybody else is going to feel like that too. So
For
I like the
sure.
Gainwell call a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a large field play because obviously the floor is really low. But I think Audi makes a great point. Like we don't really know at the end of the season, like how is this backfield gonna play out. I think there's gonna be weeks where Gainwell is the quote unquote starter or Swift is the quote unquote starter or at least getting starter reps. I think people worry too much about like who gets the first snap because they're considered the starter, but starters really don't matter, to be honest. And you look last week, Gainwell had 14 attempts and 2 targets. And if we go look at Swift, he had 16 attempts and 2 targets. So literally 2 more opportunities than Gainwell. And for some reason, Swift is 15% more owned. Gainwell is less than 1% owned. So it's one of those things that I just like. I'm probably not playing Swift and I'm playing single entry stuff, so I'm probably not playing Gainwell either. But that I think there's this ownership on Swift. The more I talk about it, the less I like him, to be honest. So yeah, I think that's a great call. If you're like MMEing and playing 150 lineups, I don't think it'd be crazy to have Gainwell 1%, 2%, get him across 4 lineups. And if he ends up being the starter or they blow, there's so many ways that Gainwell can get there. Obviously Philly has a lot of touchdown equity too. And I thought Ethan had a funny comment here. He said, friends don't let friends play Najee Harris, which I thought was really funny. And trust me, across my 10 lineups, I highly doubt I'm going to play Najee Harris. I haven't built them out yet. So I can't say for sure yet, but I can't see myself hand clicking Najee Harris, but I do. If I was playing MME, I would definitely be at least double the field on Najee. I would have 5% Najee in my 150 lineups. It's just one of those things. I mean, he's a point and a half behind Javonte, but he's 1/5 of the ownership. So I think as a tournament player, that should kind of pique your interest a little bit, mainly for MME stuff, or if you're playing, 10 entry max or something like that, 20 entry max. I would have a little Najee, but.
Yeah, I was gonna bring him up. I'm also looking at Warren. Is this right? Like I have him projected around like 2%. Like that, is that even accurate?
Yeah, I have him even less than that. So yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right.
what the heck? Yeah, Najee 3%. I mean, it's against Houston, and like everybody's just on Freiermuth. Like I feel like there's gonna be no ownership there, and I feel like it's a good spot. But I mean, again, if you're doing a single entry, like you're not considering that. But if you're doing a couple of different entries, you want to get funky. Like I think you could do a lot worse. And I'm looking at Roshan Johnson, who's only 1%. I'm seeing.
Yep.
I mean, Denver just gave up how many rushing yards was it? Like 400.
Yeah,
So
something along the lines of that. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, what's the way to take some pressure off fields, run the ball against the worst defense in the league?
yeah,
Get some targets. Like it's his backfield. I mean, Khalil Herbert's gonna mix in, but
for sure.
could be a good
And I think Johnson and Warren and Najee are. And I'll throw Khalil Herbert in there because I think he's, sort of, or at least last week, he kind of split with Najee Harris. I think those are more large field tournament plays. I don't think I'm going to get to any of them. Excuse me. I don't think I'm going to get to any of them in my single entry stuff. But for large field stuff, I think they're really interesting. So
what about James Conner, dude? I feel like he's just sitting there in front of everybody at 5,900. He's a workhorse, doesn't come off the field, and I mean Arizona isn't as bad as we think they are. I don't think that's a bad pivot either.
yeah,
3% ownership.
he has one of the best running back roles in the league. You can see 14, 23, and 14 attempts in the first 3 games, and then 2, 1, and 5 targets as well. He's really interesting. I think people are not playing him because of the matchup and the projected game script. But yeah, same sort of deal. If kind of a larger field play. For me, I don't think I'll get to him, but I will say if you start off with a Keenan Allen or Christian McCaffrey, or someone in there. Like if you start Christian McCaffrey and Josh Palmer, who are two chalky players, and the early games go really poorly for you, you could swap off to a James Conner and another wide receiver with however much salary you have left, and that will give you a lot of leverage on the field if those players do well. And obviously you're not going to make up ground with McCaffrey or Palmer because they're going to be highly owned. So Connor, more of a large field play or a late swap option for me, but I think that's a great call and worth mentioning for sure. So let's move on to wide receiver here, running a little bit long as I typically do. I know we touched on plenty of the wide receivers, so we'll be brief here. I know we got to a lot of the top end guys, so we just talked about Palmer a little bit. Palmer historically has not done great, even with Mike Williams or Keenan Allen or even both being out. So his ownership makes me a little bit nervous. Not like a smash play by any means. I do think he projects well, and I think he'll be popular just because of his pricing and obviously the matchup and the offense that he plays on. So I think that there's merit to why he's this highly owned, but I don't think he's like he's not someone that you have to play, in my opinion. I actually think he's probably a decent fade at this ownership with how low of a floor he has. I'd almost rather play Quentin Johnston, who is a much better prospect than him, is going to be significantly less owned, like 1/10 of the ownership of Palmer, and he's a little bit cheaper too. And that can also be a late pivot too. Like if you play Palmer and you need some ground to make up, you can just swap to Johnston for $300 cheaper, and gain a lot of leverage on the field and a lot of leverage on his own teammate if Johnston does well. So I actually prefer Johnston considering ownership better than Palmer. Again, we're talking tournaments here. If you're playing cash, I would obviously rather go Palmer. I think he's a little bit safer. I think his role is a little bit safer. I think he'll be on the field a little bit more. But tournaments, man, you got to look at this ownership if you're a tournament player and just say, what is going on here? Because they're both going to be on the field for three wide receiver sets. I think they both have roughly the same touchdown equity. Maybe you can make the case Palmer because he's going to be on the field a little bit more, that he has a little more touchdown equity, but Johnson is clearly the better prospect. So, it's another one where I think we could look back and say, why is this ownership not more, why is it not closer together? So yeah, I think Johnston is a really interesting play in his own right, and also a good late swap off of Palmer if you need some ground to make up. Josh Downs is interesting. I question the upside a little bit. Did have 12 targets last week, but I will note that was with Minshew. We have like literally the smallest sample size you could probably have with him and Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson played this whole first game, and he had 7 targets, but he only played one quarter of this Houston game, and Downs had 5 targets in that whole game. So we're dealing with really small sample sizes, but I do think Downs at his price, you could pair him with Anthony Richardson and 8-9% ownership. Not bad. I think Downs is solid. So, and then I know a lot of people are playing, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, around the same ownership as Downs. Calvin Austin, I think, is an interesting cheap piece. Obviously, we're dealing with one long catch for a touchdown has basically been the majority of his production on the season. He actually had one catch for 72 yards, and his other catch went for 0 yards. So a bit of a cat and mouse game there between his 2 catches, but obviously has big play potential and gets the Houston matchup, which is intriguing. So as far as the low end guys or the cheap pieces, I think those are as far as like the 4K and less. And then a little bit higher than that, Tank Dell and Adam Thielen are coming with some ownership. Ooh, these guys make me a little bit nervous, I'll be honest. Adam Thielen with Bryce Young instead of Andy Dalton, who's a downgrade in my opinion at this point in their career. So Adam Thielen makes me a little bit nervous. It's a revenge game if you're into that sort of thing. I'll just mention that, players don't catch the ball better in revenge games than non-revenge games. So that's all narrative based. There's nothing to back up that players playing against there's no data to back up that players playing against their former teams do better than a team that they haven't played against. So I think revenge games are like fun to talk about and kind of funny to bring up. But I will just note that they literally are a fugazi. They don't mean anything. They don't score more touchdowns because they're playing against their former team, and sometimes it even means less. Like I know Calvin Ridley scored in this London game, but the coach was literally bringing up how they don't want to get beat by Calvin Ridley. So it almost is like it almost can it's kind of a wash. Like people think that they're going to do well because they're going to be more motivated, I guess, to play against their former team. But that also means that they're less motivated to play against non-former team. I don't know. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but people like to talk about it. Regardless, I think Adam Thielen's ownership has me really nervous here. I'll probably have him in a lineup or two, but not someone I'm like forcing in. I do like the game environment a lot. We talked about the Carolina-Minnesota game environment. I think it's really interesting. Tank Dell is another guy who I think has a low floor. I will note that his reception prop is around 3.5 to 4. Obviously 5 receptions and 7 receptions in the last 2 weeks. So I think people are really, and he had a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. So I think people are really playing into that. You can see the really nice scores the last 2 weeks. I will just say, didn't play on a ton of snaps last week, 34 or 56. It's to be seen how this Houston offense is going to do, and obviously Pittsburgh has a pretty decent pass rush led by T.J. Watt. So, not someone that I'm like too thrilled to play, especially considering his ownership. But yeah, those are the cheap guys that I think most people are going to. I'll mention Sutton, Pickens, Myers. These guys are all okay. No one I'm like over the moon about. I think they're all okay. And yeah, I touched on Ayuk. I think Ayuk's a really great tournament play. And then at the top end, I'll just say one more time. I think considering ownership, Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill. I think those 3 guys, and I got to mention Justin Jefferson too. If you're going Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson's only $400 more. So we should mention Jefferson too, who is going to be the lowest owned of the bunch at the top end. So yeah, interesting spot there. And then tight end is such a crapshoot this week, man. It's really tough. The high price guys are overpriced in my opinion. The low price guys that are in good spots are way overowned. Freiermuth at $3,400, great price, but 22% ownership for a guy who has a very low floor. Like you're hoping he gets in the end zone. I like him on paper, but this ownership has me pausing for sure. And so. Man, I just think play a low-owned tight end and hope they get in the end zone. I like these Bills guys, Knox and Kincaid. Ertz is in a solid spot too.
I like Ferguson.
Ferguson, yeah. Ferguson, not going to get played at all, 3%. So, and really good targets. You can see 7, 4, and 7 through the first 3 weeks. Has 10 points and almost 10 points in his last 2 weeks. So, 10 points each in his last 2 weeks. So, yeah, it's a good call there. I like Ferguson, but we won't spend too much time on the tight ends. Defenses, too, I'll just say quickly, I want to get out of here because we've been running it for a long time, so I don't want people to start getting bored here. But I think the Browns defense is going to get played a lot. Indianapolis defense, and then Philly at the top end. I think those are probably the 3 higher owned defenses. I will say I think Baltimore's defense is really interesting now with the DTR news. DTR obviously has a lot of rushing equity, but also those guys can take sacks. They can take easy sacks because if they pull off and they go for a run and they get stopped behind the line of scrimmage, that's a sack. It doesn't count as a rushing attempt. It counts as a sack. So I think Baltimore's defense is really interesting, but yeah, kind of spread out ownership here at the defensive end. So, I think that'll do it. Audi, do you have anyone you want to mention last minute before we get out of here? Anyone that we didn't cover that you'd like to just mention?
No, I was just looking. I was setting up my lineup, and I really liked your take on McCaffrey, so I'm gonna try to play him. And then I'm gonna have like a mini stack of like a Miami and a Buffalo receiver. So I'm just looking at how I'm gonna set up my tight end, which I'm probably gonna go cheap, and then like the 3,000 range for the flex. So I liked your call on Calvin Austin, but I think you pretty much covered. everything within reason. I think that we wanted to go over. So
Perfect. And I'll end with this last question in chat from Mini Fletch. He said he asked what's our thoughts on Kamara and who's the quarterback for them today. Reports are saying, I don't know if this has been confirmed, but I'm operating like Derek Carr is going to be starting for them. I think Ian Rappaport reported that, so I would expect Carr to be out there unless you hear anything different. I think that's better for Kamara than if it was Winston. I'm just not. I honestly don't have a good read on this situation, Fletch. To be totally honest with you, it doesn't feel like Kamara is going to come out and get 20 touches right away. That's never really been his MO either, at least over these last couple years, or at least since Drew Brees has not been the quarterback anymore. So 7% ownership, which I think is fair. I think he's appropriately priced. The game environment's not great. I think he's a decent tourney play. I don't have a strong lean on him, Fletch, to be totally honest with you, but I think that he's solid. And Kamara, obviously one of the higher upside running backs in the league. He can break off a big play. He can also, get 7-8 targets. We've seen that before in games. So I think he's solid. Yeah, and I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't have like a strong opinion on him. I think he's appropriately priced and appropriately owned too. So I think he's just like sort of a solid play. If you have a good feeling about him, play him, man, because he probably won't be this cheap again. He probably won't have this ownership again. I guess that kind of depends how he does this week, but we shall see. We shall see. So awesome. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And we'll get out of here. And thanks to Audi for jumping on voice chat with me, and good luck in week 4, everyone. See ya.
fins up, boys. Peace.
Fins up. See ya.